Hey, I love therapy, and in fact, I've been going to therapy since I was around 6 years old. Though I talk about therapy a lot and may interview some therapists on the show on occasion, nothing that is said in this podcast should be considered a replacement for therapy. If you are struggling, I urge you to please seek guidance from a therapist because you are absolutely worth it. Hello, everyone. You are listening to Wine, Dine, and 69, a podcast about dating, relationships, sex, and self-love. I am your host, Rachel Dalton. I hope everybody is hanging in there. I myself am just exhausted, and there's no good reason why. Life is fine. I guess, do you ever just, feel exhausted of being exhausted? Just the monotony of life really just starts getting to you? I guess that's kind of where I'm at right now. Again, nothing bad, just life is going, and there's nothing really major, huge to look forward to in the immediate future. There are always things to look forward to in the distant future, but right now I'm just kind of, I don't know, I feel like I'm in the hamster wheel of life. So that's me. But yeah, I hope everybody else is not feeling like life is monotonous and questioning things. It's funny, I've been paying way more attention ever since my last PMDD outbreak is the wrong word, PMDD episode, back in the fall, where things just seemed really, really dark and really, really bad. I've been paying more attention to my cycles, and it doesn't make it better that I know that my mood being bad has to do with my cycles, but I guess it helps a little bit knowing that I'm not just crazy, but it also just feels really unfair that things are just like this. So this is the tone for the episode intro today, I guess. So here we are. Today I am going to be talking to Daphne Wells. We are going to be covering a kind of heavy topic, but just know we don't go into a ton of intense detail. We're going to be talking about an abusive relationship that Daphne left and how she started healing as a result from that abusive relationship. It took her quite some time to leave it, but she eventually got out and learned a lot and is here to share all of that with us. So before we get to that, though, there are a couple things that I was kind of thinking about as I was editing this episode that I was mulling over, and so kind of loosely related, I guess. But yeah, so one of them is, we talk about red flags in this episode a little bit. And Daphne talks about how if the person insists that you must agree with them and everything, or if the person doesn't respect you, or if they don't respect your differences of opinion, that those are all red flags. I was talking to a friend semi-recently about dating and about some green flags that I saw when I started dating my current partner. And one of them just kind of has to do with asking about a man's opinion about something. And if they give an answer along the lines of, well, you know what, really it's up to you, whatever makes you feel best. And I'm like, great, that's a green flag. So for example, the example I gave my friend is asking, what are your pubic grooming preferences? And if they say, oh, I like this, but really it doesn't matter because it's whatever makes you feel sexy and what makes you feel comfortable. It's fine to have an opinion, but really just saying it doesn't really matter to me as long as you're comfortable, whatever makes you feel good. That is such a turn on and such a green flag. And it can go with almost anything. I mean, it can go really serious in terms of this debate that we seem to still be having in this country about, men shouldn't have an opinion about abortion rights. And not that I suggest bringing that up immediately, although I do. I just find it's easier to work through people really quickly. But just asking a question, because I asked this question because I really was curious. Because, if I don't have a preference and my partner does, then I'd like to know what it is, or if there's some people have kinks about like pubic hair or things like that. So I genuinely wanted to know, but it was such a green flag to hear, oh, I really don't care. Like whatever you prefer, whatever makes you feel good, whatever makes you feel sexy. So I'm thinking about putting together a list of like green flags or questions that you can ask to kind of gauge whether somebody is a walking red flag or not, essentially. So let me know what you think about that. Let me know if that would be interesting or helpful or just kind of fun, whatever. And send me yours. If you have your own questions that you ask to figure out if a person is a walking red flag, send them to me. I'd like to know what those questions are. So Daphne in the episode ended up with somebody who was, as usual, people don't display red flags from the get-go, but these red flags did kind of become more apparent over time in this relationship. And some of the things that she describes, this person moved into her home and essentially, wouldn't leave, and it was her home, so she wasn't going to leave. But it reminded me quite a bit of this New York Magazine post that I read a number of years ago, which isn't really related to love, sex, relationships, or self-love at all, but I also have a little bit of a true crime obsession, and this falls into that category. So there's an article, a link in the episode notes, called The Worst Roommate Ever. And it actually takes place just about 10 minutes from where I'm sitting right now in Philadelphia. And it's about this guy who just would move in to people's apartments and he would terrorize them essentially and would refuse to leave, and had like training. He wasn't a lawyer, but he had law school training. And so he would use that and hold it over people's heads and threaten them. Really horrific stuff. And actually they did make it a Netflix series that featured that story as well, called Worst Roommate Ever. So check that out too. Another thing that Daphne and I talk about is the plight of being the eldest daughter, which is something I'm constantly drawing more and more attention to my parents, to the people in my life, and just to myself more than anything else, just recognizing, okay, this is something that I grew up with. There are these things that I take on as the eldest daughter. And, there's a great article that I recently read in The Atlantic called The Plight of the Eldest Daughter. So if that's you, I'm going to link that in the episode notes, and you should check that out as well. So we kind of have a little bit of a potpourri of stuff here in this intro, all kind of tangentially related to the conversation that I am about to have. But, my brain's sort of scatterbrained right now, so it kind of is fitting for my current headspace. As always, be open-minded when listening to this episode. We do get into a little bit of spirituality and how Daphne used these spirituality tools to recover. Keep an open mind, and keep in mind also the content warning about the fact that this does cover an abusive, toxic relationship. So listen with caution. Okay, with that, I think that's it. So I'm going to cut to a quick commercial break, and then please enjoy my conversation with Daphne Wells.
Calling all citizens of Halcyon City. The newest generation of heroes are now painting the pages of Delinquent Comics, an actual play podcast in the game world of Masks, a new generation. Join our heroes as they struggle to build a team and save the city. Can Titan escape the shadow of his mentor burnout? Is Soul's overwhelming power too dangerous to control? Will Muse discover her past? And how does White Knight's stomach all those strange snacks? Listen to Delinquent Comics to find out at allportsopen.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are found. New issues become available to all citizens every other Monday.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am super excited to introduce my guest today, Daphne. Daphne, how are you doing today?
I'm extremely well, thank you. How are you, Rachel?
I'm good. We were just kind of talking about how the time difference works and how it's earlier for you than it is for me, and the differences between morning people and night people, and just how humans are so complicated and work differently. So
it's fascinating to me how we're so different and yet so similar.
yeah, it's quite amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're here to talk about a kind of loaded subject, but one that is very important to discuss too. And it's your story having to do with dealing with toxic relationships. So let's just start. I find that a good jumping off point is you just telling me about who you are and what you do and how you've come to be here.
So I'm Daphne, and I am your purpose and spiritual confidence alchemist. And I really help women in their midlife, so in their 30s through generally to in their 60s, anywhere in there where we start to question, who am I? What am I here for? I want more than I've had, or I am more than I've been. And I help them be that and share their magical gifts with more people, because when they do that, they help more people, and those ripples of impact that we are here to have in this world go wider and wider. Who am I? How did I get here? Small town New Zealand girl. This is how life has to be. These are your choices, very limited ones. So it has been a long journey.
I'm kind of like that too. So I grew up in the Midwest of the United States, and there's just these ideas of what your life is going to look like.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you dare to go against that, then there's a lot of questioning looks.
There is, and there's this dance between, I found as a younger woman, there was this dance between needing to fit in because I had never felt like I belonged. The running joke in my family was that I was so different to everyone else that I must have been adopted.
Ooh, that's a tough way to grow up.
Yeah, even though as the middle child, that's profoundly illogical.
Right.
Especially when your other siblings claim to be, full blast family members. One of them looked like my father, one looked like my mother. I was the odd critter out in the middle. And
okay.
So you kind of grow up with that, and then not wanting to fit into the boxes of everybody else. And yet there's this, I remember distinctly this dance between, well, I'm just going to push all these boundaries and do it my way anyway. And then there'd be this dance, well, actually, I want to belong somewhere. So how do you do that? It was like a roller coaster, really.
Yeah. And growing up, did you have, what was your relationship with your parents like?
Well, very traditional. In the 60s in small town New Zealand. There was a right and a wrong way to do everything. You either did it the right way. You didn't show your feelings or emotions ever. So most of it was internalized.
Okay. And do you think that, I always am looking at childhood and how it leads to the things that, happen in our day-to-day life. We're going to be talking about toxic relationships today. Do you see any connections or patterns between, things that were happening when you were growing up and what eventually came to be?
Oh, yes, very definitely. Yeah, that feeling of never, ever doing anything right as a child. And not being allowed to do things my way ever, not being allowed to have any input into anything. I was the oldest daughter as the middle child, and so was very much I sometimes refer to it as the Cinderella child. I was the one that did all the chores. And
I'm the oldest daughter too.
So that was what the snigger was for. You get that, right?
Yeah, I get it.
And so I would be like, I could always think of and find or want to try new and different ways to do the chores. To make them more fun, to get them done better or more efficiently, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was, often, was always discouraged. often got me in trouble. Yeah, just the little things that kind of was so almost imprisoning, you know?
Mm.
It was that
Mm-hmm.
really trying to shove Daphne into a box, like a jack in a box thing, and then cram the lid down, you know? Where all I wanted to do was like burst open the box and not just fling my head out, but actually jump out of it.
Well, that becomes a pressure cooker too.
Of course it does. And so,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there was this, well, I'm just gonna do things differently as much as I can and do them better always, which was pressure as well. You know, that flung me into kind of high achieving mode and lots of things. And yeah, the rebel came through. Like I was the only way I could wear what I wanted to wear was to save up and buy the fabric and make it myself. So
Oh, that's a cool skill.
I became very adept at deciding what I
Yeah,
was
I bet.
designing it and making it, which, you know, that was one of the gifts, right? So you can look at these childhood memories as being, as you said, they're the experiences that form the behaviors that shape how we show up as adults until we choose to do it differently. And yet there are lots of gifts in them as well.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah,
even like the
totally.
household chores, like the I would never do what I was told in the garden. Like I would never just be like pick out all the weeds. If that was what I was told to do, I'd always want to do things differently. And so I was left inside to do the cooking and the cleaning when Mum was out in the garden, which was brilliant. I became a very good cook, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's a gift in it, and yet it does kind of set you up for how much of the box do I need to fit into for me personally, and yet still never feel like I was accepted. Do all the right things
Mm.
by the right age. Like there was a right age to get married by, there was a right age to have your children by, you know, all these things you needed to do um, in my generation, in my area of growing up, that were really confining. Um, And yet, I guess there was even that, well, you've got to make a decision about this. You can't keep putting it off forever. Are you having kids or aren't you? You know?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Yep.
You know, like I say, so you can always find the gift in it. And yes, that setting up of patterns is a really interesting one, isn't it, when we reflect back? Because, you know, like I said, that kind of feeling like I never belonged, was never accepted. Really, it's probably a better word for it. I used to feel like it was, I just wanted to fit in. What I've learned latterly is that fitting in means I'm changing myself
Mm-hmm.
into other people. And when I belong, I don't belong to anyone else. I belong to me, and I'm showing up fully as me. So it's almost like the parts of me that I sacrificed to try and fit in was never going to work. And yet I didn't know that back then, right?
Totally.
And as I say, did the same things in relationships, trying to fit in, to be accepted, to to do everything the way it was meant to happen, according to how I'd been told it was meant to happen.
Yeah, I definitely have experienced that. You want to be your partner's person, the person that they envision, their perfect person, and so you start to change things about yourself until you're looking in the mirror and you're like, who is this? This isn't me.
Yeah,
And I imagine too that like growing up in a traditional household, that puts even more pressure on women.
it does, because that not wanting to conform and wanting to question everything is really frowned upon in traditional households and traditional communities.
Sure. Yeah. It's well, kind of leading into that, this like gap place that we're in between childhood and, this healing and these discoveries that you've made about yourself. In between there is a lot of pain, right? Because you have to go through the pain to be able to have those growing experiences. So why don't you kind of just, as much as you're comfortable, walk me through, the relationships that you had that, were maybe not the most healthy, and how those worked and how you struggled through them and how you came out the other side.
So I felt really constricted in my marriage. Loved being a mother, loved raising children, and yet the relationship part of it was less than satisfying. And, to be fair, we were both brought up in very traditional families that were very different to one another. And so, I'm not sure that either of us brought the required skills to that relationship to have it be as good as it could have been. And when that ended, I was kind of duped, suckered into this relationship with this man who showed up, pretending to be my best friend, pretending to help and do chores around the house, things that I didn't know how to do.
I like some love bombing.
Yeah, and helping kids with things. And, my oldest by then had a car, so, he'd help her fix a car and all that kind of stuff, And very quickly, I was really duped and reliant on him in a lot of ways. And what I realized looking back was that there was no space in between for me to do any healing, for me to work on myself, for me to, because in amongst coming out of the marriage with my children's father, I had been through quite a few counsellors and been really frustrated. And this is not a criticism of counselling or therapy. This is my personal experience. Being really frustrated that having climbed out of this deep, dark hole to exit the marriage, they then wanted me to go back down there and figure out why I'd got there in the first place. And I was like, no, how do I move forward, right?
I get that.
And so, again, me being me as the rebel, did actually do most of the training to become a counsellor, thinking, I'll do this better, I'll do this differently, I'll do this the way that I would have found it helpful. And you actually can't in amongst the system. So I dropped that very quickly. Well, it wasn't very quickly. It was a few years into it when I realised I couldn't. So that was kind of as far as I'd come. And yes, I'd learned a lot about myself and life in that process, but really there was a lot of deeper stuff that I hadn't even accessed inside of me that needed healed. And so was very quickly wound up in this relationship, and with I don't know if you've read any of Clarissa Pinkola Este's work. She describes this kind of man as the predator male, who comes along looking for women who are vulnerable, and
The predator male. Okay.
does what he did, and he's a very manipulative, lying, controlling, abusive in every imaginable way. Treats you, it's just abhorrent, really. And it was such a complicated web that he had woven to entrap me that it actually took a lot of navigating my way out of. And in that process, I have healed myself. And that, like, the trauma was that it took 3.5 years to navigate a safe exit from that relationship, one that was
Wow.
a viable plan. There were a few false attempts in there. Very complicated because there was a herd of cows and a few other things involved as well that I was responsible for, that he knew more about taking care of on a day-to-day basis than I did. So there was a very tangled web, as I say there, that needed untangled all at the same time. So it was not a simple plan to put together. And then it took a good 6.5 years of legal stuff for me to be able to sell my home, not our home, my home. and know that I could then walk away with what was left to buy my next home. So that's where I'm at now. So in amongst all of that, there was this very conscious choice on my behalf that I was not going to get into another relationship until I was healed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it has been a long journey of deep inner healing, which has become deeply transformative for me. And I look back now and I actually think, oh man, that woman who I was, I love her so much. And I want to, like she went through so much for me to be who I am now. Yeah, really. And in amongst that process too, so back in the early days, not long after I'd given up the counselling training, I met up with a life coach, and that woman literally changed my life because she helped me see a path forward and heal things that a counsellor had not accessed, and helped me see a path forward. And yet I still really lacked confidence in like making choices and decisions, because I'd always made choices and decisions depending on what was best for everybody else involved, or to avoid
Yep.
being abused, or all of those kinds of things. So that was one major thing I had to figure out, that resulted in me writing my book, Decide, Choose Your Own Path. So and there's been a lot of personal growth and learning in amongst the last few years. And really, when I look back, I would have chosen not to go through a lot of those unpleasant experiences. And yet, like I say, I'm profoundly grateful for being who I am now.
Yeah, that's it's a weird predicament that I myself have thought a lot about too. It's like, man, I really wish that I didn't have to go through those experiences, but at the same time, if I hadn't, I wouldn't be where I am now. And so I can't help but be grateful that those things all happened.
And there's this thing, like if you think about a seed, it goes into the ground, it looks dead.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens?
Very slowly under the surface. Yeah.
And if you think about it too, like we are in New Zealand now in autumn, and so the trees are losing their leaves. A lot of trees, deciduous trees, can look quite dead in the winter, and yet they're not.
Mm-hmm.
They are growing in their root system, they're growing in their nutrient system, they're getting ready for that burst of spring growth, and diamonds are made under pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Nature gives us lots of examples of, I guess, why we need to go through those hard things.
Yeah. My dad always says that the spring would never mean so much if you hadn't experienced the winter.
Oh, wow. Yes.
He's like, there's something, he's like, because we're from Michigan originally. That's actually where I'm back home with my family recording now.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have all 4 seasons, like very much so. That's winter's very intense and then summer's very intense. But he always used to say, like, I'm really glad that we live in a place, I would hate to live in a place where it was just nice all the time.
Mm.
Or where it was just, cold all the time. To have that variety, it helps you to appreciate each season as it comes.
Yes. Yeah, and you do get it to extremes. We get 4 seasons here in New Zealand, not quite to the same extremes. And yes, I'm with you. The idea of having a nice day every day sounds wonderful when you're having crappy weather, and yet I really like the seasons too.
Exactly. Well, in this relationship that you found yourself in, was there like an aha moment where you realized this is bad and I need to get out? Or was it just kind of a series of small little steps?
It was a series of small little steps, and I was like plotting and planning, and then there was this moment where I suddenly realized that here I was coaching, helping other people create lives they wanted, and I was living somebody else's life, apart from when I was working with my clients, you know? Like,
Yeah.
it was about 10 years ago, and I was like, whoa, this is so out of alignment, Daphne, you know, like, it's like I was being myself when I was with clients and in my business, and outside of that, I was not. And yeah, that was kind of like I have to seriously find a way out of this.
There's a disconnect
Yeah.
in, what you're preaching and what you're living. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that.
Yeah.
And you said that you did try to leave a couple of times. And I have read the statistic, and I don't know if you consider these relationships, I don't ever want to put words in anybody's mouth, abusive or just toxic. But there is a statistic that says that women who are in abusive relationships, it takes like 3 or 4 attempts to be able to get out.
Yep. The second one with this man was definitely abusive. It was
Okay.
far beyond toxic. And if I could have left, I would have. However, it's my house, I wasn't leaving it for him. So that was the tricky part, and I had tried a few times and kicked him out. And then he was just like, well, I'm not doing anything with the cattle. You'll have to handle them, and of course that wasn't sustainable. So yes, several attempts.
Completely manipulative.
Oh, incredibly so. Incredibly
entrenched himself into your life so that you had to depend on him and then wouldn't leave.
Yeah. And then didn't I get ridiculed and abused for supposedly being manipulative and plotting and planning how to extricate him and sell the cattle.
Of course.
It was, yeah.
Of course. Well, how long was that relationship?
So there was probably about 7 or 8 years where he was just my friend, and then we were probably a year, maybe 18 months into living together before I had that aha and thought I have to get out. And then it was another 3.5 years before
I
actually managed to physically remove him.
It sounds suffocating.
Oh, incredibly. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a relationship like that my first relationship when I was in my teenage years. And, when you're young and like so easily manipulated and, you want to believe the best of people, it's extremely difficult. Because you think that everybody knows better than you.
And you also want the best for other people. And so one of my strengths is that I always see the good in other people.
Mm-hmm.
And want to help them be, I know better sounds like a really judgmental word. You get what I mean, though. Want them to be more of themselves than what they are allowing others to see.
You want to flourish.
That's a strength. And yet, like all of our strengths, when we dial them up too high and intensify them, they become weaknesses. And that was certainly what that had become for me.
Definitely. Yeah, it sounds like, I can relate to that. This idea that you want to see the good in people so much that it can make you more easily manipulated.
Yes.
I can definitely understand that. And it sounds like, so working with a coach was the thing that really helped you to take steps forward. And I do find, I love therapy, and I think that therapy is so important. I think it's important to be able to look backwards to be able to move forwards, right? Mm-hmm. But I do find that therapy is more about digging into the past and figuring out, like you said, where did we get to? How did we get to this point that we're at? Whereas coaching is way more looking forward and creating a plan.
Yep.
Was that your experience in being coached and coaching?
Yes, and doing so with my clients, we do a lot of that healing along the way as well. I feel what I have found is that some people are ready for one and then the other, and some people kind of want a mix. It's like we can take these steps forward and then we find something we need to work through.
There's always going to be things that, pop back up from your past.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's knowing what people are ready for. You know, like the counsellors wanted to take me down that hole. And I was like, I've been there. You know, help me move forward. And
Mm,
they're like, no, this is what we do here. And, it's listening to people and helping be aware of what they're ready for and what they need, really. Because whether you're a coach or a therapist or a counsellor, it's our job to help people on their journey through life. And that, in my opinion, requires us to listen very intently to what they're saying and what they're not saying, about
yes.
where they're at and what they need, um, and what the best next steps are for them. And they'll be different for everybody.
Yeah, and that's an important. People heal differently. People have different timelines, they have different methods, and that kind of leads me to another question, which was like, you did a lot of the rebuilding work after this relationship ended, and you kind of went back, and it sounds like you kind of had compounded things to deal with because there was a small gap between, your marriage ending and this man entering your life. But how did you work to rebuild after that? What were some things you did to take care of yourself? How did you indulge in self-care? And I imagine your kids were probably pretty healing at that point too.
Well, by the time the second man was around, they were kind of adults themselves and off doing their own thing, which in some ways has allowed more space for me to heal.
Mhm.
So, what did I do to answer your question? So, I have consistently always had a personal coach, right, who helps me work through things, who is there for me when I need them. I have found that really reprioritizing my life to put my needs first was a very difficult thing for me to do at first, until I realized how essential it is.
Mhm.
And so that's been a whole learning thing for me. There was a very big piece in there about, so I spent a lot of money and a lot of time doing lots of courses trying to find out who I was and what I was here for and all that kind of stuff. And one of the keys for me in that was when I met up with numerology,
Okay.
because numerology is calculated only from your date of birth. No other information. You don't answer any questions. It doesn't matter where you were born or the time. There are so many layers to it. And so that for me was like, oh man, that's who I am. And I felt myself energetically ground into that and sink into that and accept it. Many of the things that were shut down in me as a child are actually my strengths, quite different to my family members. And so that's been huge for me. And that then is why I trained to be a numerologist and continue training in that, because there are so many, 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 many layers that we can go in that. So that's been very key for me. And also trusting, like initially I would be like, oh, who can help me heal this, and look for the right person. Latterly, I have found that I have really trusted my intuition and just kind of known, what do I need next? Who do I need next? Rather than going out there and buying every course and every, thing that was available. Really trusting myself more, to the point where about this time last year, I woke up one morning and I couldn't put weight on one of my knees. I couldn't walk. It was just so
Oh
sore,
no.
and I had no idea what I had done. I still don't know what I did. What I did realize was that it was an old injury that I had had probably 20 or more years earlier, and had never really been healed. I'd been to doctors and physios and everything, and no one could figure out what was wrong with it then. So it just kind of got better over time. And So I really had some conversations with Source, with Spirit about it, and wanted to know what was going on. And the message I got was that there was deep trauma I needed to heal. And so literally, I was flat on my back working through this stuff on my own because I couldn't really go anywhere, and just kind of
Yeah.
figuring it out as I went. And so it is. It's that allowing, what do I want to say out of that? What were the helpful things? Was allowing space to just be, and to be on that journey and in that place, which I find for a lot of us as women, and for me especially, has been a really hard thing to do because, again, small town, practical upbringing, you've got to be doing, you've got to have results to show for whatever you've done today, and there were weeks when I didn't. And yet profoundly healing deeply on so many levels. And that actually took me right back to some very early childhood things that were right at the seat of a lot of the stuff that had kind of compounded, because we do repeat and repeat and repeat things
Yes.
until we are willing to do the healing and learn the lesson and transform through it. That's what we're here for, right? We're here to grow and transform and share our wisdom with people. And we have a choice too. So another really key thing that has been really profound for me is realizing that I chose before I was born to come to this lifetime to learn the lessons I have. I didn't necessarily choose that it was going to happen in the way that it did. I chose the principles and the energy of the lessons so that I can now help people in the way that I do. And when I kind of accepted that, it became there was a whole lot more purpose to everything, and I could be more grateful and see the gifts in what I had been through on a deeper level.
Definitely. And it sounds like, okay, did you have like a spiritual practice before the relationship, or was it something that developed during? I mean, it sounds like you started coaching, in the midst of all of this, and, spirituality always been part of your coaching practice?
Not always, no. I was
Okay.
brought up in a very, what's the right word? A very traditional Christian household where you went to church and it all happened in church. And I kind of couldn't figure out why that was the way it was, being highly intuitive as a child, and so there has always been this very strong spiritual piece to me that I haven't really accepted until latterly. So my coaching back in the early days was quite transactional in a lot of ways, and has become deeper, more spiritual, more transformative over the years. Did I have a spiritual practice when I met up with this man in the second relationship? No, I didn't. I had gone to church for many years with children so that they had that part of their upbringing, so that they could then make informed choices later on, and then had stopped going. I know why. I bought a business that was open 7 days a week, so that couldn't. It was kind of like, well, that's done.
Yeah.
It really was. And so, yeah, the spiritual practice for me, that side of my life, has become more and more and more important, because we are spiritual beings, and when we're not, what I have found for myself and for most of my clients too, if I'm honest, is that, we are these spiritual beings. We have a physical body, we have emotions, we have our mind, and unless all of those 4 areas of our life, unless we're taking care of those, they're like the pillars that support our life, like the legs of a table. So if you're ignoring one, you've not got a very strong foundation that you're building your life on potentially.
Right.
And your table can topple, and what's gonna stop it toppling is what I've come to realize for me.
Yeah, I love that analogy.
Yeah, kind of creating that and that becoming an integral part of my day, to the point where now, like I shared earlier how that self-care time for me was really not something that was important to me, not something, you just didn't do that back in the day. And now I do, like the first 2 or 3 hours of my day are walking, exercising, spiritual practice, yoga, all of that before I start my day.
Yeah, I love that. Being able to get into making it a routine is part of the hardest thing, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And yeah, one thing I did do so I have 4 children. When I finished breastfeeding the youngest one of them, I hadn't lost much or any of the weight from having children. And I was like, I need to get myself fitter to be able to keep up with the older children. By that stage, my oldest was 7. And so I would get up at the same time as I had to, the 4 of us 4 to breastfeed the baby and go out for a walk while husband and children were all in bed, and then come back, and I didn't walk very far on those days, but it did become a daily practice, that, quarter of an hour, 20 minutes. And now, I walk a lot longer than that each day. And it still is part of my daily practice. And doing it at the beginning of the day, I find works really well for me because I'm a morning person.
Mm-hmm.
Had to fit it in another part of the day, it may not happen as often.
Yeah, it's energizing too. And I always find that like starting your day in nature I always have a better day.
I do. And it's also part of my spiritual practice. It's part of my connection with spirit, with myself, with, as I'm walking. Yeah.
Well, thinking about toxic relationships and, red flags is a big term that's being used today. What are some things that you want people to look out for when engaging with a potential new partner that you would say, if this happens, maybe don't run right away, but really keep an eye on it. It's a really big red flag. What are things that you think people should look out for? And of course, that's part of the thing about abuse is people who are abusive, they like inch their way in, they put on this face of being a really kind person. And so you don't want to doubt every kind person who comes into your life, obviously, but what are some things that people should look out for to protect themselves?
And it's a tricky one, isn't it, Rachel? Because as you say, you don't want to label everyone with that. I don't particularly like using labels for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
Getting back to the box analogy, if you label someone, it's like you put them in that box. So what would I look out for? One big one in my experience is them not being able to handle you having a different opinion to them. And it's okay to have different opinions, and the need to voice them and be able to share them is important, I believe. It's when they become very disapproving or judgmental of your opinions or things you've done, when they want to know where you are and what you're doing and who you're with every moment of the day. That's a big one. Another one for me in that last relationship particularly was their needs and their life being more important than mine.
Mm-hmm.
And like if I look right back, none of those showed up right at the beginning.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Is that sometimes people are good at hiding that, and sometimes people are fucked up themselves, and don't know how toxic they are.
And I'm not sure whether these people do. Like with this particular man, does he realize how toxic and abusive he is, or does he really believe that the world revolves around him and owes him a living?
Yeah.
You know, and I can't answer that, obviously. Yeah, so I do want to be cautious in giving advice to other people out there because, as I say, none of those popped up at the beginning. So at what point would I have noticed them as red flags? I'm honestly not sure.
Yeah.
Like you do kind of get to this point, though, where you're like, oh, like I do remember vaguely being at points along the way and thinking, I don't know if this is right, you know? But it was almost like I was in too deep. I was sucked in too far, you know? And because he'd kind of sweetened my children to him as well, it was kind of made it more tricky.
That's so tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it was the lack of respect too, I think. You know, it's okay, as you said earlier, to be love bombed if you're up for that. However, when there's no respect with it, I've come to realize how important that is.
Definitely. If there's not respect, there's nothing. That has to be the basis of every healthy dynamic. I mean, every relationship, whether it's a friendship or a relationship between parent and child or a romantic relationship, respect is absolutely number one.
It really, really is. And you know, everything starts with us. So I remember when I first managed to evict that man from my house, and I was at this point where I felt so used and abused that I wasn't sure I could ever trust anyone anymore.
Sure.
And what I then realized was it starts with me. I can only trust other people as much as I trust me.
Okay.
And what I realized when I looked back in that relationship in particular was that I was doing the best I could as a solo mum when this man was introduced to me. And yet I really didn't have a great deal of trust for myself. You know, I trusted myself as a mother. I trusted that part of my life, but trusting me for me, to be there for me, I feel like I believe that's a really foundational thing.
It definitely sounds like oldest daughter syndrome. This idea that you're more comfortable trusting yourself in relation to how you impact others versus trusting yourself in relation to how you show up for yourself.
Yep.
Like your worth is inherently about how you serve other people.
And it's not. It's actually you are worthy because you are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny the messages that we pick up from childhood and that we carry with us, right?
Isn't it? It's we are habituated, you know, from a biological, physiological, human development perspective. We come into this life as perfectly rounded little babies. You know, we have our physical DNA, we have our energetic DNA, which is the coding that I calculate through numerology. And yet, from an energetic perspective, our personality and how we show up is conditioned by society, by our families. They don't necessarily aware that they're doing it. We're habituated to be who society and who our families want or need or both us to be. And then we get into this teenage and adult era where we're like, well, who am I now? You know?
Exactly.
And then we go digging deep and find all of that. So that was a really big lesson for me along the way too, was that I actually hadn't done anything wrong in all of this. This was a part of my life journey. That I got to choose whether I continued down that track of falling into another abusive relationship or actually being proactive in how I handled myself and how I showed up in relationship to myself.
And I am curious, I mean, however much you're willing to share about this, but like, how did the numerology act as because I, love astrology, numerology, human design, enneagrams, all of that good stuff. It's part of my spiritual practice. But I'm curious for you how that showed up to you and how you resonated with numerology, that it made you go, oh, okay, there's something here that I need to explore.
Okay, so one key component was in the first numerology reading that I had done for me was that I was told that I was highly intuitive, and I was like, yeah. And I didn't trust that aspect of me because it had been squashed as a child. Like, I'm the child who would see things, hear things, feel things, and share them and be told, well, that's rubbish, so you kind of quiet that voice. And then as an adult, when I started to let it come in more, I didn't trust myself or trust my intuition. I'm not actually sure which I wasn't trusting, probably both. And so, numerology, my numerology reading told me I was highly intuitive. So I could own that, right? It told me I was a natural visionary leader, where as a child, anytime I tried to lead, that was squashed. And in toxic relationships, you're not allowed to lead anything, right? You seek other people's approval. And so in numerology I work with the Pythagorean numerology, which gives you your birth code, which, you may know online from your ruling number, life path, people call different things. I also work with the Book of Life numerology, which is based on the deck of cards. And in that, you have your birth card and you have your life journey. And
okay.
And I can forecast your calculate and forecast. This is the energy for your year when you're 39. This is the energy for your year when you're 40. This is the actions for you to take this year. This is the energy you bring to it. This is the results you're going to get at the end of the year, potentially. This is what's available for you, should you choose to access it. And so it was really like the first one, the birth code one, allowed me to sink into my personality and accept, that I am ruled by the emotional plane of my energy grid. So what that means is that I struggle to do anything unless I know that there's a really good purpose for me doing it. And
okay.
whenever I questioned, my mother particularly, well, why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do it this way? It would just get because I said so,
because I'm your mom. Yeah.
And to me, I need more than that. I need to know, well, this needs done, this needs cleaned every week because otherwise this might happen, right? There needs to be a logical, not a complicated answer, but that's what I needed. And so it kind of validated all those things that had been shut down for me as a child. And like I say, the Book of Life numerology based on the deck of cards has really been so freeing for me and allowed me to really get into the purpose of my life, because our purpose is in that too. Not well, you're going to be a coach or you're going to do this, but the energy that I bring to the world is in as it is for everybody, and we get to choose how that shows up. So yeah, very, very, very empowering.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm going to have to look into that.
Cool to bring into my work with my clients too, because it really is a tremendous confidence boost to know that, I signed up for this before I was born. My soul signed up for this as part of my soul's journey, right? Yeah. And you asked earlier about pivotal moments. So there was that pivotal moment when I realized I needed to get out of the relationship. A pivotal moment for me on my own personal healing journey was when I realized that I had signed up to learn these lessons. And I remember saying to Spirit one day, okay, I am not coming back in another lifetime to learn these lessons. I'm going to master them in this lifetime.
Nip it in the bud.
Yep. Boy, did it really start to speed up then.
Yeah. It's like, all right, accelerated course on this, I guess, huh?
Yeah.
That's incredible. I'm gonna have to look into more of that.
Well, I'm here to help.
I love that.
Rachel.
Yeah, no. We have to sign up for a session with you on that.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, welcome to.
Well, Daphne, what are some we're running up on time here, but if you could give advice to somebody who is feeling stuck in a relationship or in a connection that, they know just isn't right or isn't healthy, what advice would you give to them? What is like the biggest thing that you learned from your experience that you would want to pass on to others?
Ask for help.
I love how you didn't hesitate with that.
Outside of your circle of friends and family, somebody who doesn't know anybody else involved, because it is so important that in your journey you have support that is totally disconnected to anybody else in your life, so that they are there just for you.
Definitely. Somebody who's an unbiased party.
Yep.
Okay. Well, where can people find you? Where can they sign up to work with you in your coaching practice, to, get a numerology reading or learn more about that? What's the best way for people to keep following you and keep up with what you're up with? Keep up with what you're up to.
The quickest and easiest way, Rachel, is my website, which is my name, daphnewells.com.
Awesome. And from there, I'm sure that there are links to all the other cool places that we can find you.
I'm pretty sure there are. I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram as far as social media goes.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you very much for your time and for sharing your expertise with us today in terms of your experience and, the training that you've done in numerology and on coaching. It sounds like you have your own experiences, but you also have a lot of really neat training to back everything up. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. You have been listening to Wine, Dine, and 69. I am your host, Rachel Dalton, and let's keep talking.